Welcome to another episode of the Talent Transformation Podcast. Today we have Jen Corio, Director of Talent Acquisition at BMC. Hello, Jen.
Hi, Dimitri. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. Jen, could we maybe start with a little bit on BMC?
So if you're in the industry and you're one of our customers, we really help them digitalize their technical stack, looking at how we can help them maximize their products that they have to ensure that they're being able to modernize, being able to service their customers with our products as well. And that kind of leads me on that the average person probably doesn't even know that they're engaging with our products. You can't order a pizza from Domino's without touching our products. You can't book a flight without touching our products. And that's why I say I think we're the person behind the mask that not many people know about our company. But we're always there. We're always engaging in sort of the day-to-day runnings of what is the modern world.
Right. So you're in a tech company.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're also running talent acquisition, where you are probably even changing your own talent acquisition technology stack.
Absolutely.
But your own background is not technology, right? You are actually coming from the side of talent acquisition specifically.
That is true. Yeah. I started out in recruiting about 20 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
I fell into recruitment as a coordinator and then a sourcer and then a recruiter. And really my management journey started at BMC about 6.5 years ago.
Okay.
But I've always been passionate about technology. I've been very fortunate that I've had a leadership team that's invested in me and seen my passions for technology and presented me with opportunities that I can combine both together.
Well, you're lucky that you're in a company that clearly places a lot of value on technology.
Absolutely.
So they would probably say use a lot of technology regardless because technology is great. And so generally the people that you work with are proactive when it comes to technology, eager to be agile. This probably makes your transformation easier to pull off, but you still have to develop talent acquisition strategies that work in the market. So let's talk a little bit about where you are on that, what you're thinking about, what you're doing that you think is interesting in this market, which, has changed a lot.
Dramatically.
I describe it as the post-COVID market.
Yep.
Soon to be the AI market, but maybe not yet in terms of talent. Yeah. What's going on? What are you working on in BMC?
So we obviously, like many organizations, evolved when the pandemic happened,
Right.
And we had to manage our onboarding processes differently. We had to think about our attraction strategies in a much more different way. We're nearly having to do the same again now, with the generative AI aspect coming straight at us. And I think that at the moment it's slightly different for our recruiters. And I say it's slightly different for our recruiters in that, yes, they had to evolve in that post-COVID era.
Right.
But it was very much dictated to them by the candidates, drivers, and the hiring manager sort of skill needs that they needed to recruit. Mm-hmm. Whereas now I feel that recruiters are passionate and they have a desire for the AI generation that's coming next.
Right.
There is obviously an element of fear in the industry, which is absolutely natural. But I think that whereas historically people have maybe just sort of dismissed that fear, people are genuinely thinking about how they can be more proactive to mitigate that fear in the future.
Okay, approaching it, yes.
And we're approaching that in really building the knowledge within our recruiters. So we've focused heavily in terms of enabling their understanding of AI and generative AI versus sort of sitting back and allowing them to just kind of come to their own conclusions.
Are you, besides telling your recruiters about AI, you're obviously having to answer some questions from them, right? And I'm assuming the message is that you spend more time on the human interaction and you spend less time on the busy work that helps you to generate a list of candidates that are good to talk to, you spend less time asking simple questions that, somebody could just have answered to the machine instead. So that's kind of the obvious stuff. Do you think that the recruiters are buying that message, or do you think that they're still very concerned about what their job is going to be?
I think there's still a level of concern. I think that's natural as well. I think that there's definitely a much more desire for the human element. And certainly for myself as a leader, all of the development areas are around enhancing those human skills.
Right.
We've got a brilliant team that engage with stakeholders really well. But that stickiness and that right at the table, that edge to always be in the conversation, is something that's going to become even more critical, I feel, in the future.
And so, do you think, because being a recruiter years ago, being a headhunter that I was, where we just had a telephone, okay, and then we just met people live. We either talked to people on the phone, or we brought people in and sat down with them. The art of the conversation was very, very important.
Absolutely.
And the agility in the conversation to get beyond the facade of the candidate and really understand what makes them tick was very, very important. But then you got into a phase where there was a lot of technology. And some recruiters began to think, well, I'm sort of a user of technology, and the technology, the technology does a lot of things. I kind of run the technology. I become a runner of technology. I make it work, and then it produces the result. And I think some people have forgotten about that, the level of sophistication that you can have when you converse with somebody.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And the way that I've positioned it with my team is to stop thinking about their role being about the candidate, in the respect of we're humans first.
Right.
And taking a people conversation to whether it's a candidate, a hiring manager, or a HR business partner, when you think of the people you're talking about, whether it's individuals, whether it's a hiring process, whether it's an interview process, when you think of it from a person perspective, you get to that deeper level. We're thinking more from that human aspect in how would I want to experience that, or what's the experience that I want that individual to go away with. That really changes the conversation. And when we're putting technology first, and a prime example might be, well, Mr. Manager, you need to complete this interview feedback form because the system does not allow me to move forward until I've done this.
Right.
Our motivators aren't right. And people become frustrated and they try to bypass the process, or, human nature. We look for the easiest route. I think that's where the conversation in particular has changed post-COVID, because candidates aren't coming into a conversation and saying, what's the salary? Where is it based? How often do I need to be in the office? They certainly are asking that question. But it's not the only one.
Right.
And that's really challenged the recruiters to have to think more about that you appeal, that attraction strategy. And post-COVID, straight after, we didn't necessarily have the tools that we have had for now the last 12 to 18 months, where AI helps us think about crafting that you appeal or that personalization. So we're seeing it come together much more
Yeah.
cohesively.
Yeah. I think as a recruiter, you need to know what you want to accomplish, regardless of whether there is AI or no AI.
Yeah.
I also think that, and we develop technology, but at some point, what you really want is the technology to become invisible. So how much are you spending time training the new generation of recruiter who might come into the job thinking, well, this is great. There's lots of technology. And like I said, you run the technology and it kind of does the job and you make sure it doesn't do anything wrong. How do you get them to really dig into this art of recruiting and at the same time understand and use the science of recruiting?
Oh, I mean, it's a great question. I think, we keep enablement at the front of a lot of the sort of personal performance aspects. So the goals that they're set in their role has an enablement target of learning that they can do. They choose the subjects themselves. So we try to keep it at the forefront of the daily tasks so that it doesn't feel so much like it's forced upon them in the respect of, I have to do this.
Right.
And it not be of interest, because a classic example in the past is people being recognized for the amount of hours of learning that they've done. Great. But what have you done with it, and how have you implemented? That's the more meaningful side of your learning. And so I've always taken a very different approach to the education of an individual. But I also think that again, another thing that's changed post-pandemic is the way that we learn and the way that we consume information. Is entirely different. It's podcasts, it's videos.
Yeah.
Yes, there are white papers still.
Somebody reads them.
Somebody reads them.
Not too many people.
No, maybe they're the new fish and chip paper.
Yeah. Right. And they've been written by ChatGPT anyway.
That's
so
true.
There's no author being offended by them not being read.
Very true.
Yeah.
So I think you have to take an organic level of interest, but you also need them to be curious. And
that's a good point.
That you absolutely have to have that. And if they're not curious, I think those are the ones that potentially would be more affected by the AI that's coming.
Yes.
Versus those that are curious.
So at Avature, curiosity is one of the 5 things that we rate when we review candidates, because it's not how much you know at that moment. It's how much you're willing to know or you're willing to invest in knowing. And the truth is, curious people are always trying to know something new.
Absolutely.
And if you're not curious, then you're force-feeding people.
Yeah.
And, force-feeding is, I always say, a lot of work. And I always say, at Avature, I say, well, we hire adults. Yeah. So I'm hoping that they've already figured out that they need to be curious in this world as it evolves. Yeah. If you bring a new recruiter into your organization, how well defined is the path to get from maybe an amateur recruiter to a really high value strategic partner to hiring managers that are very specialized in whatever they do and maybe specialized in many different things that you as a recruiter are not specialized in, but you need to now understand enough to support them?
Yeah, I've seen team members come in at quite a junior level, some fresh out of an agency world, first time in-house, evolving into leading executive hiring. And I think it's not necessarily a time span. I think it is capability, curiosity. I think it is ability to adapt in communication style.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it's as scripted as something that BMC do, but I do think that we have a leadership team that recognizes potential. And through that mix of the individual themselves being able to develop and have that desire and motivation, that's where I've seen them be really successful.
Yeah.
I love that Avature looks at curiosity. I myself would 100% say that's why I have the knowledge of Avature I do today. I was the curious one in our team. I was the one that was going into the system and picking on this or playing with this.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that whether it's Avature, whether it's generative AI,
Right.
that quality really shapes a lot of careers. And along with learning ability, I think that it's a good dynamic that the modern recruiting needs to put more emphasis on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even in some of the conversations I have, there's the natural desire to say how many years experience or how many skills in this. And actually when you really boil it down, when you've got the qualities of curiosity, motivation, learning desire, actually those things are going to make somebody more successful than I've had 20 years in the industry.
True.
Doesn't
Yes.
mean it's relevant.
If you're in the right organization.
If you're in the right,
You have to be in the right organization for that. But if you are, and you are curious, and I think that for us, we address that with Avature in the sense that, we're a technology company. We're supporting recruiters. And I said to my team, we're not going to hide the technology or cover it over and make it simple to understand. We're actually going to explain it as it is.
yeah.
And if they're curious, they want to go further, fine. If they're not curious about that or they don't have the time to be curious, that's okay too. But we like to get people interested enough in the technology to seek out ways to leverage it and use it in different ways over time.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your involvement as TA in the strategic direction of BMC. Has that relationship evolved? How deep is it at? How connected are your programs to the strategy of the company? I'd like to hear about that because in Avature, I always look at my talent acquisition as very strategic.
Yeah.
And when my company expands, I always go to them first and I say things like, I'm thinking of, being here. Is there talent there?
Yeah.
So I'm always using them in that way. But, I don't know how many companies do that. What are you guys doing?
Oh, it is at the forefront of the majority of the work that we do. So we're very fortunate that in our company strategy, we have a sort of pillar to it that's called Prioritize People. And that is all about, well, as it describes, talent management, talent acquisition, attrition, promotions. We really keep it at the front of how we drive our strategies because ultimately, you lose talent. That's a cost to the business. You don't have enough people to deliver the strategy.
And you're in the tech sector.
Yeah.
Which is a take no prisoners recruiting world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I think in particular from a talent acquisition perspective, it's why that people conversation that we have is not just about the hiring. It's about, okay, what are the development goals of your team? What are your future skills? How does that tie to the product roadmap? Is there something like generative AI that's on the horizon that we need to be prepared for? Is, our attrition rate going to cause us to spike in hiring? Is it going to cause us to slow down? And for us at BMC, we've had a strong focus on strategic goals for the organization, and people really had to be at the front of that conversation along with our sales strategy and our go-to-market strategy, because they're so critical to each other. that you have to have that as part of the conversation. And again, we're very fortunate that we're in an organization that puts that first.
Right. And of course, tech is always evolving.
Absolutely.
It's leaping forward. You're a tech company. So you're also in the situation of saying, how do we produce artificial intelligence inside our own platform, like us? So you are also in the process of recruiting people that are not just interested in AI, but actually able to create, to generate and develop artificial intelligence. And that's going to be pretty challenging. We all sort of know that tech has lots of demands, and every now and then you get a very specific demand that is sort of not there yet in terms of experience, right? But everybody wants 10 of those people, right? This is kind of like, when I work with the government on cybersecurity and they say, we want to hire 10,000 cybersecurity experts. And my answer is, I'm not sure there are 10,000 available.
Yeah. With SC clearance.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So are you having deep discussions with your line managers about where to find those resources and just give me a little insight into what's going on?
I wish there was a magic recipe for the answer. I really do.
It's called 3D printing.
We absolutely need to do that. We are. And we have a mainframe section to our business, which is predominantly, labeled as the dying technology.
But it still powers a lot of processing in the world.
Absolutely.
Yes.
If we don't have mainframe, there's a lot of things that do not work in this world.
Right.
And in particular in that space, we've got quite a high demand of mainframe experience with AI and machine learning skills.
That's a tough one.
That's a unicorn.
That's tougher than I thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you throw in that we probably need sort of 10 to 20 of them around the world.
Yeah.
In the locations we're already present in. And that, again, I think that's why it's so important for us to have a seat at the table when we go into strategic planning.
Yeah.
That we can use our toolkit to say, okay, if you want that exact match, you're going to find 3 people in the world.
Right.
If you're going to compromise a little bit, you could potentially find 20 people that have this skill.
With different learning paths that you need to define over the next 3 years, maybe, plus the way you organize the teams, where you maybe bring in somebody that has some AI experience, but they've never seen that particular hardware or software, and you combine them and mix and match skills. And a really good recruiting organization can help businesses to do that, right? And those are really hard challenges, though.
Absolutely. We have shifted a little to sort of investing in the graduation talent to be able to. These are ones that have actually done some form of mainframe in their education. We've actually collaborated with universities to put a mainframe course into the curriculum so that we can make sure that we don't lose the talent when they come out of university. And, like I said earlier, BMC is not probably the first name that in the tech space young talent thinks of. And so we have to make sure that we're attractive and we get into that conversation really early with them in their lives and their, as they're thinking about entering the business world, to stay ahead.
How much does your team work with the hiring managers and the executives to craft this story?
Oh, it's a true partnership. Absolute partnership.
Because it's pretty technical. It's got some very technical dimensions to it, right? And it's you have to tell a really good story. And I always say recruiting is really ultimately about telling a good story.
Absolutely.
Right? You need to tell a story that's so exciting, and at the same time you need to weave that person's idea of themselves into the story, so that when you finish telling them the story, they want to be part of the story, or they feel part of the story. And so, but you can't tell a story that's not true.
No.
Because then you get a fallout in the first year that turns out to be very expensive and very disruptive, right? So you have to work with the hiring managers to craft a true story that's an interesting story, that is a forward-looking story, that can suck people into your environment, okay, as opposed to somebody else's. You know, it's recruiting is, there's a winner and a loser in every competition for high-value talent, right? So how long do you think it's going to take you to get to like what you consider a really, really comfortable state for yourself? Like how long do you think that journey is in BMC for you, considering all the changes that have occurred and are occurring?
I think actually it's going to have to be in the next 3 to 6 months. And I say that because the industry is evolving so fast.
Yes.
And we have to stay in, like I said earlier, in step with it.
Yeah.
And, we've done a very good job of the data that we want to target, the messages that we want to convey. And it really is that resource level.
Yeah.
And so that's where generative AI is going to help us, is to produce that content month in, week in, whatever the cadence is that we have to maintain. That's where it's going to help us. And, I joked with the chief marketing officer the other week, is that recruiters are not really just recruiters. They're salespeople, they're marketers,
people, yes.
They're tech people.
They're tech.
There's so many aspects to a personality of a really great recruiter now that it's almost like your smartphone. You wouldn't go out with a torch, a camera, but you do in your smartphone.
Yeah.
It's almost to the same concept that we have to be to that level. And I genuinely think that to stay ahead and to keep our attraction strategy strong, we've got to do that before the end of the year.
Yeah.
For us to keep that momentum. Because again,
I think that's especially true in tech, where
absolutely
AI is something that you not only have to use, but you actually have to produce.
Absolutely. But the recruiters are already asking the what next on the generative AI aspect. In our industry, there's pretty much a product for job descriptions, screening questions, sifting pipeline, but they're like, what next? What now? How can we stay advanced? And I love that they're having that mentality.
Sure.
It's great.
Good.
It's that desire aspect.
Right.
Obviously, in some locations, there's going to be regulations that are going to prevent us from doing some of the things that we want to do, but that desire means that we're gonna keep up. We've got people that want to stay in touch.
Yeah, and you need it to be a market by market approach.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you will not be competitive in certain markets.
Yeah,
I think that's interesting. Well, it'll be really interesting to see how you fare in 3 to 6 months, because you've given yourself a very short time frame.
Yeah. Well, we like a challenge at BMC.
Yes, and it's been recorded.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody will find it and say, well, wait a minute, 6 months there for everything being absolutely, super. So listen, it was great chatting with you. I do want to have you back and talk about how you tune up your organization.
Yeah.
And we'll see where the AI takes us over the next 6 months. But I think it's going to take us to some interesting places.
Exciting places. Thank you for having me, Dimitri.
Fantastic. Thanks.